Hey there, we're back for another video. I'm going to talk about nut spacing now. The spacing of the strings here at the nut. And this is a guitar I've been working on for a while. The nut spacing on this one had a good looking nut right here, but the spacing was kind of wonky. I wish I would have videoed this while it was together. What I'm going to do the best I can do here. So there's the center to the center from the E to the A string. I mean, to come over here to the E and the D, and especially, look at the difference here. Hope you can see this. The D and the G. Basically, they might have used the center to center. No, they didn't, because otherwise it would have been the same. They, the E and the A were closer together than any of the other strings, and the spacing got wider and wider and wider and wider as you went across the neck. That's typical of a center to center spacing, where people put the strings at the same distance. Well, you think that would be work because, okay, you put your fingers at the same distance, but it doesn't work that way because you end up with less space between the strings. So in other words, if you take a basketball, if you set out lines on the sidewalk that are all the same distance, you put a basketball and then you put something smaller and smaller and smaller, and you work your way down to a ping pong ball or something, there's more space between the smaller ones. So what that means is you still got to get your fingers clear, and you will end up muting the bigger strings. Whatever, I just personally very much prefer to have equal distances between the strings. It feels roomier, it feels more cushiony. That's just the way I like to do it. Okay? So don't argue with me. So, here's a guitar. I thought it needed a new nut. And first of all, and part of the reason is because I did frets on it. I did Evo frets, and so they're a little bit taller than the worn out frets that were on there previously. So the nut slots are too low on this one. And I was going to shim it and do all that. And then the nut spacing was just too wonky, and I decided just to redo it. So this is a technique I call the long nut technique. I don't know, I get to make up these words, and to me that's just what it made me think of, because I start off with a nut that's longer than the slot. So back in the day, I used to measure the distance I wanted from the edge of the fingerboard to the E, like this, and then I would calculate the thickness of the strings, and of course I had a little chart, that I could refer to. I didn't have to do this. I would subtract that from the fingerboard, subtract the width, and then I would calculate the distance between the strings. Now that is a good technique, except that in practice, that is, it sounds good on paper and it works good on paper, but in practice, what would happen is I would space these two and then these two, and invariably when I got into the D and G, they'd be off a little bit, because you're talking about thousandths of an inch here and trying to lay the strings in there, and just never got it. Sometimes I'd get it right, but it was hard to do precisely. So while doing a mandolin one day, I started laying out the strings across the fingerboard at the distance I wanted, and I thought, that's a lot easier. And then what I do is get them where I want them, and then I move the nut back and forth like this to get the strings evenly on here where I like it, and I'll be good to go. What I don't get to do there is I don't get to get that precise distance from the edge of the fingerboard in. But you know what? I don't think that matters as much as getting a consistent distance between. So in other words, 5,000, 10,000ths of an inch difference on the edge doesn't make as much difference as having these spaces. And also, when you deal with the same size necks over and 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 over, you learn that there's a certain spacing that this is going to be. In other words, I'm going to use for a 1/11/16 inch neck. I end up using, almost the same spacing. There's some variance in the necks. They vary 10 thousandths, 15 thousandths of an inch maybe. But again, it's more important to get this distance. So, now, the first thing I did on this guitar, I thought, well, this is a 1/11/16 inch neck, but it's a custom neck. So I thought I should measure it. It came out This is actually a 1 3/4 inch neck. It certainly doesn't feel like it. It feels slim, you know. So that's going to affect my spacing. So it's actually a little bit over 1 3/4 of an inch. Not much. We're not going to worry about that. It's a 1 3/4 inch neck. I know from experience that on a 1 11/16, the spacing in between these two, right here, ought to be about 0.255 of an inch. And if you want to go a little bit wider, you can go 57, maybe 58. You got too much, you're going to fall off the edge. And you shouldn't fall off the edge. I've had customers say, well, I'm pulling the string off. Well, you know, if you're pulling the string off, you're pulling it out of tune too. You see that? However, you got to work with the customer. You got to, you know, make it playable. But, you know, I can play guitar with that string sitting right on that edge right there and never pull it off. And that's just because I have precise fingering from playing mandolins, electric guitar. And if you ever want to check out your fingering, put 8s on an electric guitar sometime. I mean, they're like limp. No tension at all. But, you know, Billy Gibbons with his ZZ Top, you know, plays these super light strings. Of course, you know, he's doing bends and stuff, and I don't know how precise his intonation is, but point is, a lot of instruments, banjo, has pretty floppy strings, and you shouldn't be pulling the string off. But in the real world, just like trying to get the measurements exact, in the real world, you've got to build some fudge in there. So, what I do, I know that 255, 257, 258, 259 even is going to work on a 1 11/16 inch neck. This is a 1 3/4 of an inch neck. And so 260 on up is going to be your better measurement. 265 is a good one between the strings. Now, I will say this. On a 1 3/4 inch neck, it can feel really nice if you don't space your strings all the way to the edge. If you leave them in a little bit, you have a really firm, like a landing platform kind of feel on this high E string because you've got a little more fingerboard on the side. So it's not comfortable, you know, to play on the edge of the fingerboard like that. It's not comfortable. And your finger has to make a little bit more of a bend to get down there. So if you leave a little bit more room on a 1 3/4, the neck can feel really super comfortable that way. And that's what I'm doing here. So I've got to set this one to 265. So the first thing I do is set my calipers, and I've already got the strings cut, so I cheated a little bit because, again, I left my GoPro in the house, and I had to go in, I had to get it, I forgot the battery, blah, blah, blah. But now we have a GoPro going. So what I do, let's loosen these strings up here a little bit so I can move them around. The first thing I do is set that low E like almost right on the edge of the fingerboard. Set that low E down there. And one trick I use here is on the nut, I take my file and I file only on the back side of that nut. So like this. So I'm not touching the front at all. That way, if I get done and I decide I don't like my spacing, I can go over to the belt sander and I can sand off the back of this nut and get rid of all my marks, and I can start all over again without having to ruin the nut that I fit. And that actually happened here because I started off too small, and I thought, man, there's a lot more room on that fingerboard. So I sanded off the back edge of that, and I started all over again with wider spacing. But anyway, I set the low E string, get that just kind of set in there. I got my caliper set to 265, and then what I do is loosen this up again, pop this in here, and you slide that string across there so it just clicks, and I'm shaking the calipers here to make sure that fits. I don't want to force it, and I don't want slack in there. Okay, so I'm going to hold it with my thumb, and again, I've already got a little bit of a slot in here, so I'm cheating. And mark it on both sides with a pencil. The pencil is not going to go all the way in there, so when you pull this string out and set it over here and get the proper file, you're going to have a little bit of a gap. You're going to be able to see air on either side of the file. Get your file balanced out. And come in here and cut your groove right there. See, I'm holding it off the face of the nut. I'm only cutting the back side right now. File just a little groove. Set that string in there. You work your way across the neck doing that. Okay? Set this string in there. Let's pop it loose. Now, I got a little bit of a chatter here. So this distance here is a little bit more than 265. It's a little more than I really want. So what I would do at this point now is go ahead and cut that string down. So before we do that, it's a little bit tight between these two. I generally would not lay them all out like this, but because I wanted to test the fit, I laid them all out first. But a lot of times what I'll do is go ahead and cut the slot down to where I want it. Because as you're going down, you can move your file just a little bit, like this. And you can direct the string in a direction that you want to go. So right now, there's just a little bit too much room. This is just a little tight between the E and the A. And I got a little bit more room between the A and the D. So what I'm going to do, put a pencil mark on here, the direction. I want that string to go that way just a little bit. So I'm going to pop that out of there. And this is a 45. And I'm going to hold my file like this and sand down that way and pull that string across the nut just a little. I'm going to go ahead and cut a groove in it now because I'm sure of the spacing. Just some tension back on here. Let's check it. See, I got a little wobble right now. Haha, that's perfect. So I set that down exactly where I wanted it. That feels good. That's nice. And that's perfect. So I have 265 as perfectly as I can get it going across the net. Alright, now what I would do is I'm going to file each slot down where I want it. And I test it check it by holding the string between the second and third frets. And it should have a tiny, tiny, tiny clearance here at the first. And this one's got quite a bit because I haven't filed it down. I'm going to do that with each one of those, but when I get them down to where I want them, actually before that I do that, because the fingerboard has, or the frets have a curve, there's not much tension on this right now. So I'm going to grab the nut with my thumb here, and I'm going to go ahead and push it over. And I'm getting the E to E balance that I want right here. That's why I call it the long nut technique, because I can slide that nut back and forth with all the strings spaced on here and put it where I want it. Now, my eye is pretty good, but just to be sure, just to check it, I'm going to come up here and measure from the edge of the fingerboard to the string. And you got to do this carefully. You don't want to push the string over, which is why I put some tension on it. So it's about 115. And over here it's 130. So I've got it too close to the E, to the little E. You know, even though my eye says it's pretty good, right there, that's it. You're getting an optical illusion from the thinner E and the fatter E, so it kind of looks like it's off, but it may not be. Check it again. You got to try to hold your calipers up straight. 135. And 115. So I got a little too much. Let's go over just a smidge more. Right there. Gosh, that's precise. $125. And I want about 120, 115 over here. 115. So I've got 10 thousandths of an inch more on the little E than I do the big E, and that's fine for right now. Now, I've got the nut where I want it. Now I gotta sand it into the correct spot. So I'll get my pencil, and sometimes for this kind of thing, these half pencils are really good. That lets you get right up in here, and you can scribe a big fat line here. So I'm gonna do that. Put that pencil right up against the headstock, and pencil that in, and do the same thing over here. Give myself a nice big line right there. And now the trick is going to be to file it down to that point. And one little thing that I do sometimes is not file that nut exactly precisely against the fingerboard. I leave just a hair worth of bone on each side and then round it off so that you can't really feel it. And you've got a little tiny bit of bone sticking out on either side of the fingerboard. And that gives you just a little bit of room to slide that nut back, just those little thousandths of an inch that you want. Again, that's a mandolin technique. I had a couple of pretty good mandolins, and I noticed on one of them that the nut stuck out past the fingerboard a little bit. And I studied that, and I thought, you know, this guy didn't make a mistake because his binding is perfect. I mean, that's my Chris shot mandolin, and the workmanship on that is absolutely outstanding. And I got to thinking about it. I thought, you know, on a mandolin, the little E's, here's a mandolin nut. The E's, in fact, this might be the original Chris shot nut. The E's are so close to the edge over here, and the G, it's easy to have that piece of bone break off and flake off. And if you give the nut just a little bit more room over here, round the edges off, and let it stick out past the fingerboard a little bit, you can give yourself a little bit more bone over here, a little bit more support, and it doesn't break off as easy. As I studied that, I said, you know, that's not a bad technique. I mean, obviously, it's a pretty high-dollar mandolin, and like I said, he didn't make a mistake on it. He did that for some sort of intent. So I don't mind doing that on guitar, even. Leave it on there a little bit. Manipulate it a tiny bit. Okay, so this nut's where I want it. Spacing looks great. And I did a neck reset on this guitar. The strings running right down the E. It looks pretty good to me. I'm going to say perfect, but not quite perfect. So just for fun, I'm going to come in here and measure these directly. And I got 270, 270, 270, 268, 269, 0.02 of an inch off with a direct measurement, and it's on the little strings, so it's not as noticeable as if it was a tighter spacing on the bigger strings. That's pretty good. That's as good as I can personally get it. 0.02 of an inch, you know. It's way better than it was. Last the original net was probably about 10 or 15 thousandths of an inch off. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my strings, and that's a tedious process. I'm not going to film at all, but I basically just loosen the string up, move it out of the way, get the proper file, and now I'm going to work on the front of the nut. I like to split it. So if this is the fingerboard plane, and this is the plane down to here, you split it, you know, even like that a little bit. One last trick when doing this is on the last couple strokes, you go ahead and tilt it down a little bit more. And that lets the string come off the nut and kind of roll downwards rather than having a sharp back edge on it. But your main height adjustment is going to be on that front edge. And this just takes a long, long time on a nut, you know. You got to file, you got to check, you got to file, you got to check. And on. This is tedious, especially when you get to a mandolin or a 12-string guitar, God forbid. You know, I had a left-handed 12-string guitar once that Gave me a headache. And I made a bridge for that left-handed 12-string guitar with wider spacing. Jeez. Okay, that's about as close as I'm going to get right now until I actually get everything done. I've got it right here. You can't see this on the camera, I'm sure. I'll hold it down here, and it's got a tiny bit. I'm going to go down a little bit more, but not until I get the nut finished, glued in there, and set. And then I will come back in and I'll do my last final adjustment. Now remember on this A string, I'm still trying to go over just a little bit here, not too much. I don't want to wreck this now. I got it where I want it. I'm going to hold that file at just a tiny bit of an angle. Take it down. Okay? When I get done with all that, I will take this over to the belt sander and very carefully file all this excess off, shape the nut, and that sort of thing. I'll show you one more little trick about working with nuts. You loosen your strings up. Say I need to take that nut out for some reason. Loosen the strings up some. Get yourself a little block of wood like this. Slide it up under the strings. Pull up. Come over like that. And you can take your nut out. You can put it back in. And you can see my pencil marks now. Okay. I'll file down to that. I'll file the back of it down. I'll shape this nut. Polish it and get it where I want it after I get the string slots done. Because if I blow it now, which I have done occasionally, then that's just less work I had in shaping it and polishing it, cutting it and all that. So, alright, that's the long nut technique. Or whatever it's called, I don't know. I've never seen anybody do it that way. So I just thought I would pop it out there for you guys. I don't know how many of you guys actually work on your own guitars or not. But it's a great technique. You can really get those nut spacings nice. You better check that again. It looks good. It's going to be over here. It's important that I was where I want it so that it matches the curve of the fingerboard correctly. Otherwise you mess it up. And that's another reason why I wait to do those final cuts until I'm actually done, because I want to get that settled and done, and then I would do the final click. See you later.